begin. What is your just opinion on the whole war out in the Middle East?
I think it depends because it's definitely two different wars between the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. The war in Iraq was primarily pursued for, prevention of genocides and other reasons too, but that's the primary reason that's been given there. The war in Iraq is more so tied to, the war with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and trying to make sure that it's the prevention of terrorism, so that one has a more direct cause or causal link to the war on terror. But for the two wars, I would say that they're noble purposes for getting involved, but they definitely have been going on for a really long time, and those opinions are starting to wear on American
people
society.
Are starting, and then, like I said, but then do you think we can even just win the Afghan war? I mean, if it's been going on for 10 years and we haven't really made any headway at really doing anything.
I think it's been going on for a really long time, and I think it would be a really hard war to win because it's not like wars from earlier in history where it was one country against another country. We're not even at war with Afghanistan. We're at war with these terrorist cells. And so in order to say that we would win the war in Afghanistan, it would almost be like saying that we would have to win the entire war on terror, because if any of the terrorists from within the war in Afghanistan escaped to other countries, well then we're still at war with the same group. So I think that it would be a very, very difficult war for us to win in the end, but I think that, we definitely can decrease the number of terrorist groups that are within the area and maybe get some of the civilians within some of the countries to side with the United States or side with the United Nations to try to make it so that those terrorist groups would dwindle in numbers and maybe they wouldn't have the support within some of the countries that they currently do.
Okay, and some, including me, might consider it to be known as the Second Vietnam War. Would you agree with this nickname?
I think it's definitely a good nickname for it, or there are a lot of comparisons that can be drawn between the two. When you look at something like the war in Vietnam and the relationship to the current war today, the main relationships that you're going to find there is, what's happening here at home and how society is being fractured, the economic impacts on it, and where we're having to focus a lot of our energy and our resources currently because of the war. So I think when you compare it to the war in Vietnam, there definitely are a lot of comparisons. There definitely are differences too. We're not trying to fight communism anymore. Instead, we're fighting terrorism. But, there are those elements where we should learn from history before and be able to see the similarities that are there to adjust the tactics that we're using.
Okay, yeah. When do you think just enough is enough and we just leave the Middle East and say it was a failure?
I think it would be like with Vietnam, where if we leave, we have a threat of things getting a lot worse if we leave completely. But in terms of withdrawing and no longer pursuing it as a war and as a war effort, I think it's when the American people begin to say, to our governing officials that we no longer want to pursue this as a war. And it may just be the way that it's always been in the Middle East, where we have our bases and we have some people there in case things go awry or in case they go bad. But as soon as the American people speak up and tell their governing officials, we cannot pursue this anymore, we need to focus our attention on what's happening here or any of those sorts of things, then that's when enough is enough, because we're a democracy. We're supposed to listen to the people of the United States, and hopefully that will happen.
Okay, yeah. Now, how much do you think the war in the Middle East has actually impacted our economy on a scale basis?
I think it definitely has. I think right when the war started, it helped our economy. It gave us a little boom or a boost. In the early 2000s, our economy was booming. We had our housing market at the highest that it had ever been. But when you stay in a war for an extended period of time, that's going to begin to wear on the economy, because then now you're going to continue to have to produce the wartime supplies, but the consumer supplies are going to go down, and that consumerism can only kind of be tapered down for a short period of time. And if the war continues on, then all of a sudden you're going to have a lessened supply of those consumerist purchases or the products that they're wanting, and now supply and demand, that's going to cause inflation within the country, and will end up, hurting the economy in the end once the war has stayed for a really long time, because people's salaries are not going to keep up with the rate of inflation.
Yeah. Do you agree with what the government's methods on just trying to solve the economy right now?
That's hard to say, because when we look at the history of the U.S. in our first Great Depression, we initially didn't do anything, and look how long the Great Depression lasted for the 20s and 30s, 29 in most of the 30s, and even going into the early 40s. But then all of a sudden, once we started doing those programs, it gave the United States citizens hope, but it also put us into a lot of debt. And I think debt is something that our country is suffering from quite heavily. Most definitely right now we have so much debt, but at the same time, if we didn't do some of the programs, it might make us worse off. I don't know what to think there. I think that as long as the government's trying to do something, it's better than not doing anything at all, because the American people need to have that hope. But I can't say whether or not it's the right actions that they're taking. I mean, for me, I would say focus on the American citizens, and focus there, but who knows?
Yeah.
There's no perfect answer when it comes to our economy right now, because it's a mess.
It is so awry. I mean,
It's a
I
mess.
fully understand what you're talking about here, and what would be your own just individual plan and how you would actually just try and fix it?
Yep, I think if I was president, or if I was in charge, I would focus first on trying to decrease our unemployment rate, because I think that would stimulate the economy quite heavily. And so, with projects that we're already having to put money towards, because with the stimulus package, you see all those construction projects, whatever. I would try to expand upon those, getting more of the people to work during that time period. And with unemployment, people collecting unemployment, I would have certain regulations that went along with that. You have to apply for X number of jobs. If a job is offered to you, that you should have to take, that job until you maybe find another